Hello, this is Rick Jordan, the Church Resources Coordinator for the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship of North Carolina. I welcome you to this webinar on From Awareness to Engagement, How Your Church Can Fight Human Trafficking. We will have three presenters today. Our first presenter is Patricia Witt of Raleigh, North Carolina, with Partners Against Trafficking Humans, North Carolina. Kania is from Asheville and is with Life 107 Ministries. She is our second speaker. And Pam Strickland from Farmville in Eastern North Carolina is our third presenter. She is with the Eastern North Carolina Stop Human Trafficking Now organization. Our presenters are members of the leadership team for the North Carolina Coalition Against Human Trafficking. NC.CAHT is a statewide network of nonprofits, agencies, and other organizations that work together to fight human trafficking in North Carolina. Our presenters are also the co-chairs of the Community and Faith-Based Committee of NC.CAHT, and it's in that capacity that they join us today. Today's webinar will begin with the presentations, and if you have questions or comments to make, you can enter them at the question box at any time. The question box is at the bottom of your screen. Just scroll your mouse down and you'll see several options pop up. I will ask the questions at the end of the presentation, but feel free to put a question in the box at any time. Thank you for your participation in today's webinar, those of you who are attending. And just remember that this webinar will be recorded and put into the CBF North Carolina Virtual Resources Library on our website. So I want to welcome these ladies, and I was just telling them that I remember the first time I heard about human trafficking in North Carolina and thinking, I thought that was a Texas thing or Arizona or California, somewhere on the border kind of thing, and was very surprised to find out that we have this issue in North Carolina and that churches can address it. So Pat and Kathy and Pam will be presenting theirs separately, and then we'll join together for questions at the very end. So Pat, Kathy, and Pam, welcome.
Thank you. We welcome you to our webinar, which is intended to encourage your engagement with us and others to fight human trafficking. All our presenters have been actively raising awareness and encouraging engagement of others within the community to join in the fight against human trafficking. In particular, we have all assisted faith communities to become aware. While the three of us happen to be Christians, we welcome all faith communities to join with us. Unfortunately, the crime of human trafficking affects all of us. As Rick mentioned, the North Carolina Coalition Against Human Trafficking is a statewide organization of individuals, churches, faith-based organizations, and agencies working to fight human trafficking in North Carolina. As stated here, our mission is focused on each community becoming empowered to fight human trafficking. Joining NC.CAHT connects you with others across the state, and you will receive a monthly newsletter which contains a calendar of local, state, and national conferences, information about legislation efforts in North Carolina, and much more, including services for trafficking survivors. The coalition has a seat on the North Carolina Human Trafficking Commission as well. This coalition fosters collaboration among all its members and those within the community. By joining, you can help lead these efforts. Responding to human trafficking can occur in many ways and can also seem daunting. This is a simple outline of how you may wish to approach your faith community, how your faith community will respond. The various aspects to address listed here are some of the major ones. You may discover others as your members become more and more informed. We encourage you to connect with others within your community and with the coalition as you respond. To begin, I wanted to remind us that our scriptures can guide us. Here from Proverbs is one to encourage us to take action and to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Victims of human trafficking are indeed without ability to speak for themselves. They are not the only, but they are not only the destitute, unfortunately. While the text here is included in the Hebrew scriptures, other faiths ascribe to similar teachings. And as you learn more about human trafficking, you will agree that to prevent it will require a change in our societal norms. Doing justice, loving kindness, and walking humbly with our God can be a prescription to begin these needed changes. I think all faiths have a similar command as this one. The first action I learned about ways to become acquainted with the first action I learned about was to become acquainted with the neighbors on your street or in your neighborhood. Many victims have been rescued because a neighbor noticed something that did not seem right and reported it. Kathy is going to share with you about ways to equip your faith community and propose immediate actions you can take to do that. Next, we're going to walk through some basic information about human trafficking in an attempt to give you a glimpse of how human trafficking manifests itself within our society. Here are several resources to give you a more complete picture. First, let's decide what is human trafficking. Human trafficking legal definition is expressed here. The specific actions involved, the means that occur, and for what purpose. You'll notice force, fraud, and coercion. That with the aspect of commercial or let's say financial involvement is the primary definition for human trafficking. The federal law was adopted in 2000 and has been renewed several times. Our North Carolina law was adopted in 2007, almost identical to the federal law. And in 2013, North Carolina became the 8th state to adopt what many call the Safe Harbor Act. That act protects minors, gives stronger position for prosecution of traffickers as well as those who facilitate the actions of the trafficker, like the taxi driver or the hotel clerk who look the other way. The small footnote is very important because minors under the age of 18, with regard to the commercial sex trade, are no longer considered anything but victims, and they are to be investigated for abuse and neglect by our social services in each county. So what factors allow human trafficking to occur? Well, we know that it involves vulnerability and demand behaviors. Also, you can see some of the social involvement of our society here with social media, the gang culture, the ability to access illicit and prescription drugs. All of these are some of the factors that allow trafficking to occur underneath the surface, hidden beneath the surface, we call it. So what's allowing human trafficking to flourish? Why would someone want to be involved with that? Well, of course, it's primarily because of money. There's low risk, but they get very high returns. Also involving the impact of social media. This has allowed our society to become anonymous and act in ways that are not easily identified by their peers or family members. Also, we see a weakening of the family unit, and as the capitalistic system allows higher and higher profits are always what are desired. And now our consumers want low-cost products. All of this leads to forced labor, which includes sex trafficking. So vulnerability is a common denominator. And these vulnerability factors were compiled from a poll of shelters specifically established for teen victims of human trafficking within the United States back in 2010, but it seems to be holding true today in 2018. Locally, the Salvation Army in Witt County tells us that all the female victims they have provided case management services for have experienced abuse in their childhood, which includes sexual abuse. These characteristics look similar to the at-risk population, but there are those survivors who tell us their childhood was a positive experience. The common characteristic is being vulnerable. These are factors to address when thinking about actions of prevention. Let's see how the trafficker recruits. They're excellent observers of human nature, and they know how to find out the needs of those they approach. Some of the needs are concrete, like food, shelter. Some are related to desires, and some survivors have stated they were wooed for months before anything went wrong. Nice words were given and expressed, expensive gifts, all these sorts of things. While the use of force does occur in our society now, that is a lower percentage of the cases of human trafficking. So what are some of the emerging priority factors that we might want to consider as we think of how to respond to human trafficking? Here's one example, again from Witt County. It was funded by the John Rex Foundation, and it was for an assessment to see what was the presence of human trafficking, particularly of minors in the county. Focus groups were interviewed to determine what services were already in existence for the factors that are known nationally. And these were the top 4 in Witt County. They most likely exist in all our counties. But this assessment was conducted by a consultant that was well known in the nationally. It is available if you'd like to have it to look at. The process for the assessment is described and can be duplicated in other counties. So here are some of the, this glimpse will help you see how encompassing this crime of human trafficking is and why there are so many aspects to consider. Between the 3 of us, we will give you resources and proposed actions to help you engage. I'm going to talk a little bit now about protection and prevention. I think our faith communities are ideally suited to encourage a nurturing home environment. Here are some of the many resources to support those efforts. All 4 of these actions are supported by research and strong evaluation. The Prevention Guide from the U.S. Children's Bureau, and that bureau is under the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, gives very practical actions, including the background to support why the actions are needed. Protective factors is the label you might hear and read about using these proposed actions of prevention. Creating a thriving environment in your neighborhood. This set of suggested actions are responses to vulnerability factors that can exist within our neighborhoods. For example, social media has a huge impact on family dynamics and allows intrusion from outside sources that families may not be prepared to address. I'm sure that's not a new revelation to you, but it does have a huge impact in our fight against human trafficking. So keeping our families informed and provided with strategies to counter these risks can be a strong preventive action. I think faith communities are in a position to reach many families and our individuals. There is a significant role for our faith communities. Another set of actions that faith communities are well positioned to address are these examples of advocacy. And there are resources available to guide you with each of these examples. Now, Kathy is going to share with you from her experiences and knowledge addressing human trafficking in Western North Carolina. Kathy?
Hello, everyone. I am Kathy Kania, and I'm so happy that you have joined us today. My organization is Life 107 Ministries. We are a faith-based nonprofit organization located in Western North Carolina. And we've been working with women who, across the United States, who have been exploited through prostitution and trafficking for almost 8 years now. I wanted to point out to you that just by telling others about this webinar and the information you'll be obtaining here, you can already be making a difference in the life of a potential human trafficking victim or survivor. So the first thing that I want to do is give you an overview of the opportunities that you have for immediate involvement. So I'll tell you about this list that I'll be going over for you. I will mention that most of these are Christian resources, but if you have a different faith, and many of these resources can still be very helpful to educate you and help you in your community. So I encourage you to feel free to still explore these resources as we go over them. First, I'll tell you about the Salvation Army Annual Day of Prayer for Victims of Human Trafficking. This year that will be held on September 23rd. On the same day, the International Justice Mission sponsors a Freedom Sunday that I'll tell you about. Both of those organizations offer prayer guides that can be used year-round. Then I'll tell you about...
Kathy, excuse me, we're not seeing your screen if you have it up.
I apologize for that. Let me get back to... How about that?
Great, thank you.
Apologize. Okay, so I've told you about the International Justice Mission, Freedom Sunday. I'll tell you more about that. Then I'll tell you about a prominent organization in the United States called Shared Hope International, which offers faith in action toolkits, and I'll tell you about other toolkits. Then we'll move to talking about an organization called GRACE, which stands for Godly Response to Abuse in the Christian Environment. I'll tell you about some documentary screenings happening across the state of North Carolina this fall called Be the One. And I'll remind you of how you can join NC.CAHT. And I can tell you about how to join a newly formed organization in Western North Carolina called Western North Carolina Freedom Coalition. And then we'll talk about the National Human Trafficking Hotline. So I'll jump right in and tell you about the Salvation Army resources, which are many at their website online, and you can see that website there on your screen. I want to highlight the Annual Day of Prayer for Victims of Human Trafficking. This event is held annually, so if you don't have a chance to participate this year, you can perhaps put this event on your church calendar for next September in 2019 and plan accordingly. So at the address indicated on your slide, Salvation Army has some free resources for your church. All you have to do is download and or plug their resources into your event plan. And the first of those resources is the poster that you see pictured on the slide here. That poster can be downloaded and printed by you and used on your church bulletin board or perhaps in your church announcements. And this poster is available in English, Spanish, French, and Portuguese. Also at the Salvation Army site are a couple of lessons, Sunday school lessons for younger folks, for teens and for younger children. And you may wonder how the issue of human trafficking in general and sex trafficking specifically may be appropriately presented to this age group. But the Salvation Army has done a wonderful job in these Sunday school lessons of presenting the general idea of exploitation through the story of Joseph. Each of these biblical lessons is specifically tailored to the age group and is tastefully presented. Using the story of Joseph, the idea of broken dreams is presented and is paired with the truth that God is a God of restoration. A definition of human trafficking is presented along with the idea of exploitation in general, and along with an admonition not to be part of the demand side of the problem. Some simple action ideas are presented along with ideas for prayer. And you can view these lessons in their entirety online at the Salvation Army website before downloading them for use. In addition, the Salvation Army website has a downloadable Bible study for adults, and an excerpt is provided here on the slide. Again, using the story of Joseph, this adult study goes further, and it highlights the themes you see on your screen, which are beloved, betrayed, bewildered, and beginning again. These things are often the journey of anyone who has experienced exploitation, and certainly the journey of a human trafficking survivor. So using Genesis 37, this one lesson study highlights how no one is exempt from suffering betrayal, but how God allows new beginnings in all lives. The study ends with the importance of intervention in our own lives and in the lives of others for the glory of God. And it asks the question, how can we commit to partnering with God in this modern slavery struggle? After you complete this lesson, NC.CAHT is a wonderful resource to partner with as your congregation seeks out how to contact and connect with other local organizations in your area to make a difference. And I'll provide that information for you at the end of this section. As I mentioned, also available at the Salvation Army site is a prayer guide. This prayer guide is another free resource, another downloadable resource, and it's available in both English and Spanish. The prayer guide is perfect for any setting, including a church service, a Sunday school, or a life group, or for personal use. Another free prayer guide resource through my organization, which is Life 107 Ministries, is located online at the website address on your screen. And this prayer guide highlights focuses for prayer if you live in Western North Carolina. Okay, the next resource is from International Justice Mission, also known by many as IJM. You may opt on September 23rd of this year, or again, this is an annual event, so in September of 2019, to use the resources of this organization. Their highlight event this year, as I mentioned, is September 23rd, and their event is always entitled Freedom Sunday. IJM's focus is on international missions international missions and international trafficking. And just to mention that international trafficking looks very different than it does in America. But if you like to focus your efforts on international missions and making a difference there, you can visit their website. Their Freedom Sunday focuses can be on South America, Asia. You can choose your focus, and you can request sample materials for your Freedom Sunday and find out how to host such an event at your church. I mentioned a prominent national organization that's called Shared Hope International, and they have on their website, pictured there on your screen, a Faith in Action toolkit. This toolkit does need to be purchased, but I can tell you it's well worth the money because it is jam-packed with information. It's a really comprehensive packet designed to educate men, women, youth, and faith leaders about human trafficking and how to promote awareness about the issue. And in this kit, you're provided both printed booklets and thumb drives that contain multiple resources, including short video clips that you can use in small groups, Bible studies, training meetings, as well as printable versions of training materials that are also included. Also included in this packet is a special training video called The Chosen. And this video highlights the experiences of 2 American sex trafficking victims, more appropriately referred to as survivors, and how others used relationships to lure and deceive them into unexpected exploitative relationships. And this is a very common means of recruiting here in the United States. So this kit's resources can be used in sermons, on retreats, in Sunday schools, in youth groups, and on youth retreats. So again, you can purchase this Faith in Action kit and find out much more at sharedhope.org. Yet another interfaith toolkit can be obtained from UNICEF USA. You can obtain either a USA version of this toolkit or a global version, or both. And the difference in this toolkit is that it emphasizes the commonalities between differing faiths in approaches to ending exploitation worldwide. And the last toolkit that I'll mention to you is from an organization called CASE, which stands for Chicago Alliance Against Sexual Exploitation. This is a toolkit developed specifically for Protestant faith communities. And although it was created initially specifically for the Chicago area, we recommend it highly because it is jam-packed with good information, including biblical passages and reflective questions to ask in group settings. It has practical action steps to take to eliminate the exploitation of women and children. And at the end of the toolkit, it has a listing of some very good organizations that work to end sexual harm against women and children. I'll switch now to talk about an organization called GRACE, which stands for Godly Response to Abuse in the Christian Environment. A very important culture change needs to take place in our communities and in our churches in the spirit of caring for the least of these, and that is to care for survivors of sexual abuse in our midst. Bob Chavichin is the founder of this organization, and he is also a professor of law at Liberty University. And Bob cites a statistic that may surprise you. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men have been sexually abused before they turn 18 years of age. So to make this statistic real, think of the fact that as many as 20.5% of our congregations are survivors of sexual abuse. So how does the church both change the culture that's producing these statistics and minister to these sexual abuse survivors? How do we protect our little ones in our congregations from becoming one of these statistics? And as Pat mentioned, this is the start often of a prevention effort for people who have experienced sexual abuse in their childhoods and then become more vulnerable later on in life to potential traffickers. So how do we respond when someone discloses sexual abuse within the church or outside of the church in such a way that the love of Jesus is communicated and true healing becomes possible? I commend you if any of you have policies already in place at your church. That is a vital effort, but unfortunately today that's not enough. Grace is an organization that will come to your church and teach your church how to better understand how changing the culture of the church toward this issue can change lives. They will conduct prevention training and a 2-day seminar which focuses on understanding protection, understanding sexual abuse survivors, understanding offenders, which is often a missing part of combating this issue, and understanding the church culture regarding this issue. So you can contact Grace Ministries at the email address on your screen to get more information. One thing I have not mentioned is that they can come to your site and conduct an on-site building risk assessment, and they can help your church implement specific steps so that you can obtain a unique child safeguarding certification. This fall, one easy way that you can introduce your church to the tragedy of trafficking happening right here in North Carolina and in all of our 50 states is by either watching or sponsoring a showing of a 52-minute documentary. This documentary is produced by the Texas Attorney General's office, but a showing is already scheduled in Asheville for September 10th and in Raleigh on August 29th. And we encourage you to consider sponsoring a showing of this documentary either at your church or at a local venue. NC.CAHT can assist you in this process and will offer you a free digital customizable image like the one on your slide. And this image can be individualized for your event details and used either as a poster or for handouts and flyers for your event. And I'm going to show you now a brief 2-minute clip of this documentary so you get a sense for what you would be seeing.
One educator, recognizing the signs and choosing to report them, was all it took to save her student from sexual exploitation. One neighbor taking action was all it took to free a young woman who had been sold into slavery right next door. One bystander choosing not to look away was all it took to rescue a 13-year-old who was tied to a bed, drugged, and sold for sex. One person, one moment, one act that saved a life. You are about to see the stories of these real Texans who chose to be the one in the fight to stop human trafficking in our state.
I hope you'll be interested in this documentary, and as Rick mentioned, it doesn't happen just in Texas, but North Carolinians can use the example of Texans to be the one in the fight against human trafficking. If your church does decide to sponsor a showing of this documentary, NC.CAHT has written and can furnish you with follow-up discussion questions to conduct for your viewers and can advise your church of whether or not there might be an anti-trafficking organization in your area that might help you facilitate the meeting. I want to highlight once more, just very quickly, how you can join NC.CAHT for free and get access to a lot of these services that we've mentioned. You just email the NC.CAHT address on your screen. You can request a free membership application and get started. Another organization you can join, which has just been newly formed, is the WNC Freedom Coalition. You can contact them at the address on your site. The WNC Freedom Coalition exists to network with and equip believers and Christian organizations in Western North Carolina to develop and facilitate united, Christ-centered anti-trafficking responses and resources for survivors, as well as offering training and educational event opportunities. Now, one of the most important things that you can have available personally and at your church and for your staff and congregation is to learn that there is a national human trafficking hotline. This hotline operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The hotline is for use by every American, whether you are a community member or a human trafficking survivor seeking help. Help can be obtained from this number in 200 languages. So if you suspect a human trafficking situation, please call this number, or if you wish to find even more resources for a survivor, they have a listing of those. Please keep the number in your phone contacts to have on hand at all times and tell others about the hotline. Polaris also operates a text line, so you can text 233-733 for help in the same sorts of circumstances. And lastly, if you're just getting started or whether you just want to stay up to date, there are dozens of excellent books on the market today about human trafficking. Some books focus primarily on sex trafficking, some on labor trafficking, and some combine information about the two types of exploitation. Some books may focus on international trafficking, while some focus on the nature of trafficking in America, and some are memoirs of trafficking survivors. Memoirs can be written either allegorically or in a general narrative manner, but please do keep in mind that some of these memoirs can be rather graphic in nature, so we recommend that you carefully vet the books you choose to read and perhaps inquire about each book first from someone in an anti-trafficking organization who has already read the book. But nevertheless, books are a wonderful way to become and stay informed about human trafficking. So now I'd like to introduce you to Pam Strickland, who is from the Eastern North Carolina Stop Human Trafficking Now organization, and she will tell you more about labor trafficking and fair trade resources, and she'll close our webinar session for us. Pam?
Thank you, Kathy. Hi, this is Pam Strickland, and I'd like to add my welcome. Excuse me, I'm the founder of Eastern North Carolina Stop Human Trafficking Now and an active member of NC.CAHT. So let's be clear. Human trafficking is a business. You can see here on my graph supply and demand. And most human trafficking efforts focus on supply, on reducing vulnerability of potential human trafficking victims, which is really important work. But that's only half of the problem. We must also address demand. So what causes men to purchase sex? There are too many reasons for us to address them all today, but one significant factor is the use of pornography. So you might ask, why am I talking about pornography to a group of church people? The unfortunate truth is that Christians aren't immune to the disease of pornography. Pornography is a problem in the church. In fact, these statistics come from a group of practicing Christians that are 13 and older, and you see that 73% consider viewing porn wrong, which sounds really good, a vast majority. However, if you turn that around, then you realize that 27% of practicing Christians 13 and older don't consider viewing porn wrong. That's over a quarter. This is something that we are going to have to address in the church. Here is an excellent resource. An excellent resource that was done by Barna several years ago called The Porn Phenomenon. This book is full of statistics like the one I just showed you. It's a great resource to help you understand how pornography is influencing not just our culture, but Christian culture as well. Porn is more accessible than ever before, and it's finding our children without them looking for it. Here are some books and websites that you can share with parents and youth workers in your church. These 2 books are intended for parents to read to their young children, so they will know how to respond when, not if, but when they see porn on the computer. They need to know that they won't be punished or have their computer privileges taken away. Otherwise, they will not tell you, and you won't be able to address it. This book is a resource to help pastors and other Christian leaders deal with pornography and related issues. This book has information from how to preach a sermon about pornography to how to deal with predators in your church. One way to educate your congregation and community about the harms of pornography is to recognize White Ribbon Against Porn Week. This website has ideas for videos and other resources you can use to educate your community. You can distribute and wear white ribbons for the month of November, have a bulletin insert, or have statistics about porn on your social media. Kathy mentioned a group to you called Shared Hope International, and part of that group is a men's group called the Defenders. In order to end demand, Christian men must be willing to step in and join the anti-sex trafficking movement. So here is the pledge for members of the Defenders. I am taking a stand to fight against pornography, prostitution, or any form of the commercial sex industry. I will hold my friends accountable for their actions toward women and children. I will take immediate action to protect those I love from this destructive market. I think probably the second one is the hardest. Men may be willing to commit to not using pornography or buying sex themselves, But to call out friends who talk about watching porn or buying sex, or friends who watch movies that glorify porn or prostitution, or who even listen to music that do those same things, that's hard. And that's what's needed to change our Christian culture. Men must hold other men accountable. So we've spent some time talking about sex trafficking and ways to decrease its prevalence by addressing demand. I'd like to move to talk about labor trafficking. None of us wants to believe that we are contributing to slavery, but the sad truth is that we all are. It's almost impossible to know who makes our clothes, electronics, and other consumer goods, and under what circumstances. One strategy that is working is supporting fair trade certified products. Fair trade products are slave-free, child labor-free, exploitation-free, and the workers are paid a fair living wage for their country. So that sounds great. Where do we find them? Well, you look for these logos in your local grocery store. Now, I'm thinking some of you might be skeptical that your local grocery store has these. But here are some pictures from my local grocery store. Now, I live in Farmville, North Carolina, population 4,300. So if the Food Line in Farmville has fair trade products, I'm willing to bet your local grocery store does too. So this slide is showing breakfast items, coffee, cereal, and a Pop-Tart-like pastry. I'm especially impressed because the Food Line brand coffee is using fair trade. And here are some other goodies. You see two different sweeteners that have the fair trade logo. Chocolate with the fair trade logo, and of course my personal favorite, Ben & Jerry's ice cream. So these are some things that you can educate and your congregation about and encourage them to do in terms of changing their spending habits. But what about the church itself? Does your church buy coffee? If it does, then you might want to investigate Equal Exchange. They provide wholesale prices to churches to buy fair trade coffee. Another way to educate your congregation about fair trade is to show them some fair trade products. You could actually have a fair trade market at your church. You could have it to raise awareness about fair trade products and being a conscious consumer, or to raise funds for a foreign mission trip or another ministry, or both, of course. So when's a good time to have one? Of course, I think any time is, and our nonprofit has them year round, but two times that are especially good are October and the Advent season. October is Fair Trade Month, so it's a great time to educate your congregation about fair trade. You can have a bulletin insert. You can switch the church to fair trade coffee during October, being sure, of course, that there's a display that explains the change and why. You could show a documentary. You could have a fair trade market. The Advent season is also a really popular time for fair trade markets. December has been the most successful time for our nonprofit to sell fair trade products. People want to buy meaningful gifts for their friends and family instead of another sweater from the mall. So how do you host a fair trade market? There are several options, and I'm going to share two that I know of. The first is Equal Exchange, which is the same company that provides the coffee to churches at wholesale prices. They make it easy for you to have a fair trade market or a catalog fundraiser. Just visit their website here. Another is Serve, which is one of many vendors that we buy fair trade products from. They also make it easy to have a fair trade market. If you're interested in showing a documentary, this is a good one. The chocolate industry, unfortunately, is just rife with exploited labor. This would be a good educational opportunity. So we have given you so many resources, so many things to think about, but we don't want to lose sight of why we do this. We do it to prevent human trafficking and to be sure that victims and survivors receive the services they need. So you might be wondering, so if we start educating the church about this issue, what if someone in our church or someone that I know discloses that they're a victim or a survivor? Well, here are some tips. First of all, don't express surprise or horror. Do say, "I'm sorry that happened to you. How can I support you?" Don't ask questions about what happened. Do say, "I'm willing to listen if you want to talk about it." If the survivor is open to being directed to supportive services, you should direct them to local resources if you know of some. If not, this is an online support for survivors. The Rebecca Bender organization is a wonderful Christian resource for human trafficking survivors. So where do we go from here? We hope that you will consider joining NC.CAHT. Your church can join, or you can join as an individual. Our next meeting is November 2nd at 10 o'clock. Our main meeting is in Raleigh, but we have 4 other cities that video conference in: Greenville, Asheville, Greensboro, and Charlotte. For more information or for a membership form, you can email us at nccat@gmail.com. This is our mission statement, which I think Pat shared earlier, so I'm not going to do that again. We do want to be available to you as a resource, so I'm sharing our contact information again. Your first speaker was Patricia Witt. And your next speaker was Kania. And then finally, me. I would be glad to be a resource. And finally, I'll just leave this information about NC.CAHT up and turn it back over to Rick.
Thank you very much, Pam and Pat and Kathy, for sharing all this with us. And I don't see that we have any questions just now. Let me ask our attendees, if you have a question, if you would, you can put it in our box to ask about that. Here's a question. Can you offer any suggestions for Christian nonprofits that are hoping to get more support from local churches in order to meet needs for services? What might be the best way to approach that?
Can everyone hear me? I can tell you that if you are an organization in Western North Carolina, the Western North Carolina Freedom Coalition that I mentioned is hoping to do exactly that, to partner and connect churches with nonprofits so that there can be connected resources and efforts. So if you want to contact that organization, if you're in Western North Carolina, that may help.
Go ahead.
I will say, I think that many churches are organized such that they have a mission team, and that it may be a good idea to find out who's the leader of that team in a particular church and ask if you could address the mission team and tell them about your ministry and ask for their support.
I can speak a little bit about Protestant denominations. The 3 of us have been reaching out to the state level organizations for the primary Protestant churches, Methodist, Presbyterian, Episcopalian, Catholic, and they do have some They're beginning to get stronger in their outreach to support human trafficking. So I would recommend that you go to your, and the Baptist, I didn't mention them, but if you would want to reach out to them or go on their websites, I think you might find services they're already offering or programs that they're interested in. And at least you would get contact people to contact about what your particular needs are or how you would like to collaborate with their efforts.
This is, I don't have this question in front of me, but the question that comes to my mind is for someone who this is kind of a new subject to, the people who are the survivors are almost like invisible to us maybe. So what kind of signs are there that we could say, here's something to look for to say this person might be, I mean, we've gotten good questions from, or good responses that Pam has given us, but like, how do you initiate a conversation if you see someone that you think might be a survivor, and how would you know if they were?
Yeah. Okay.
Pat?
Well, first, I think we need to clarify survivor and someone still unrescued. A survivor means someone who has been rescued from their situation of human trafficking. Because if it's someone still that you think might be in the still being trafficked, we definitely want to advise that you not try to intervene, that you contact your local law enforcement, or you call National Human Trafficking Hotline so that they can then refer back to North Carolina people who are trained and know how to intervene. And I'll pass on to someone else about if it is truly a survivor, how would you want to respond?
Rick, if I understood your question, you were asking how would we know if someone was a victim of human trafficking? So some things you can look for just out in your community might be if you're at a restaurant and the employees seem nervous or anxious when the manager's around. If you notice that all of the employees arrive together and they all, they work all day, then they all leave together, or if they work all day and then they all go to, say, an upstairs apartment and they all sleep in the same place. So working and living in the same place, those kinds of things sort of indicate that they don't have freedom of movement. You might see that kind of a situation also at nail salons. That's been common. Another thing just to be aware of in many different situations is an older male with a younger female who does not appear to be related, and she's just anxious, nervous, and he appears to be, intimidating her. She's not allowed to speak for herself. And of course, each of the three of us have, longer trainings with red flags and signs to recognize human trafficking. And we would love to come and share those with your congregations.
Thank you.
I might add that some of the resources we presented to you today include those red flags. And if you decide to do a screening of Be the One, there's some excellent materials about red flags associated with that documentary. So that would be an excellent one to help individuals learn more about how to recognize potential situations of human trafficking.
I'd like to mention too, Life 107 has operated an outreach call center for the last 8 years. And if you are wondering if those survivors may be in your congregations, I can answer yes. They're very, are likely are survivors in your congregations, in your Celebrate recovery groups and your Bible studies. Even as I have been doing some speaking in churches, I've had women come up to me afterwards and tell me I'm a survivor. And so those folks really are there. And so it's important to start being aware and sensitive to the folks in our congregation.
Well, thank you all for presenting to us and to our attendees. Several of you have asked about the PowerPoint presentation, and I believe we can get that to put on our website so that you can connect us too, because the good news is it seems like there are lots and lots of resources to help us understand this.